You know, from the melting seabed of the Arctic all the way to the vast, empty reaches of outer space, a new global competition is heating up. But this isn't a race for territory like in the old days. Nope, this is a race for the critical resources that are going to define, well, pretty much everything about our technological and economic future. So let's dive in and explore this unfolding story across the world's final frontiers.
What you're looking at here isn't just an icebreaker. It's really a symbol of a massive transformation. As climate change melts the sea ice, it's not just opening up new shipping routes. It's unlocking access to a huge, previously unreachable treasure trove of minerals on the ocean floor. A whole new frontier is opening up, and with it, a brand new era of competition.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to break down the incredible demand for what are called critical minerals. Then, we'll look at the two frontiers where the race is really on, the Arctic seabed and outer space. After that, we'll see how all this is forcing countries to draw new lines in the sand, and finally, what it all means for the global order.
So, what's driving this whole thing? What's the engine behind this new global race? Well, it really all comes down to a massive, surging demand for a very specific set of raw materials. These are basically the building blocks of our modern world, and the demand is exploding because of the global shift to green energy and other advanced tech. And the scale of this demand, it's honestly hard to wrap your head around. The International Energy Agency projects that by 2040, the world is going to need 600% more of these critical minerals than it does today just to meet our climate goals. Let that sink in. This isn't some slow, gradual change. It's a massive shift, and it's putting immense pressure on everyone to find and lock down new sources. And just look at what we're talking about here. These minerals are absolutely essential for everything from the batteries in electric cars to the magnets in wind turbines and the alloys in military jets. But now, look at that top producer column. You see a pattern, right? The supply chains are super concentrated. For a lot of these materials, China is the dominant player in either mining or refining. And that concentration is a huge reason why the search for new frontiers is on.
All right, let's head to our first frontier, the Arctic. For basically all of human history, its resources were locked away under thick ice. But now, that ice is disappearing, and nations are waking up to the fact that a massive prize is becoming reachable for the very first time.
Early surveys have already confirmed that all the big types of seabed mineral deposits are there. We're talking about things like nodules packed with cobalt and nickel, crusts that contain rare earth elements, and sulfides with copper and gold. But here's the catch. Because it's always been so difficult to explore up there, we have very little data on how much is actually there. We know it exists, we just don't know how much.
And this is really what makes the Arctic so tantalizing. The surveys we do have suggest these aren't just any old deposits. Samples have shown concentrations of scandium, which is vital for aerospace, that are 10 times higher than deposits found anywhere else on the planet. I mean, that's a huge deal. It points to a uniquely valuable resource, and you can see why national interest is so intense.
So the big question is, who gets to claim all this stuff? Well, the main rulebook is a treaty called the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. Basically, it allows a coastal country to claim exclusive rights to the seabed way out up to 350 nautical miles if they can prove their continental shelf extends that far. And this little provision, this extended continental shelf, is what's at the very heart of the new Arctic land or seabed grab.
And believe me, that race is accelerating. In 2023, a UN body basically gave a thumbs up to Russia's massive claim over a huge piece of the Arctic seabed. Then, just a year later, the US went ahead and announced its own giant claim. So what's the result of all this? Almost the entire Arctic seabed is getting carved up and claimed by individual nations, not managed by some international body.
Okay, let's shift gears and head to our second frontier, outer space. Just like the Arctic, it's packed with resources, but its legal framework is even more out of date, which has created what's pretty much an unregulated arena for competition. Think of it like the Wild West.
So the main law for space is the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. Now, this was a Cold War document, right? It was designed to stop countries from planting a flag on the moon or putting nuclear bombs in orbit. It was a huge achievement for its time, but it was written long before anyone was seriously thinking about stuff like asteroid mining, space junk, or non-nuclear weapons in space. Which brings us to the central question, doesn't it? Can a treaty that was drafted when computers took up entire rooms really handle the space race of the 21st century? The treaty is totally silent on huge modern issues, like who gets to mine an asteroid, who has to clean up orbital debris, and, as we're about to see, what even counts as a space weapon.
And this is where things get really murky, because the old treaty doesn't clarify a key difference. The militarization of space, that's using satellites for things like GPS-guided bombs or spying, that's been a reality for decades. It happens every day. But the weaponization of space, actually putting a destructive weapon in orbit, is a totally different story. Besides WMDs, it's not clearly defined or banned, and that legal gray area is where a lot of the tension is right now.
So, you've got these fuzzy rules for the Arctic seabed and even fuzzier rules for space. What's happening? Well, nations aren't just sitting around waiting for new treaties. They're acting. They're making moves. And by doing that, they're forming new alliances and competing groups to push their own interests and really to set the rules for the future.
And in space, this competition is starting to look like two big teams. We're seeing two major blocks forming. And no surprise, they pretty much mirror the geopolitical divides we see right here on Earth. On one side, you have a US-led group, and on the other, a bloc led by China and Russia. They're each pulling in different partners and creating their own separate rulebooks for space.
So let's quickly break them down. The US-led Artemis Accords are basically a set of principles, kind of a gentleman's agreement on how to behave in space. It's mostly attracting traditional US allies. The China-Russia-led ILRS, on the other hand, is much more of a hands-on project. It's a technical plan to actually build a base on the moon, and it tends to attract emerging countries that are looking for real technology and a seat at the table.
And this brings us right back to resources here on Earth. See, these space blocks don't exist in a vacuum. The countries signing up for the ILRS moon base project, they heavily overlap with the BRICS Economic Alliance. And get this, the BRICS nations control an estimated 72% of the world's rare earth metals. That control over resources on the ground gives them incredible economic leverage that directly shapes these new alliances in space. When you take a step back, you realize these fights over the Arctic and space, they're about way more than just minerals or moon bases. They're really about power, they're about influence, and they're about reshaping the entire global order for the 21st century. So, let's boil it all down. The big takeaway is that these vague old laws create a finders-keepers mentality, where acting first sets the rules. In response, countries are creating their own competing systems, like Artemis versus the ILRS. Alliances are being redrawn, not around old ideologies, but around who has the resources and the tech. And just to throw another wrench in the works, the US position in the Arctic is actually kind of complicated, because it never officially ratified UNCLS, the very treaty that governs the seabed. In the end, what we're really watching in these final frontiers isn't just a race to dig stuff up. It's a contest to establish the norms, the precedents, and the laws that will govern our future. The competition isn't really for the minerals at all. It's for the power to write the rules of the future.